was born in Jamaica, the West Indies, 1943, February 9th. Your grandfather had to ride on a horse to register my birth, and it was 3 days late. So in rural Jamaica, you're registered at the post office. The postmistress, she just assigned me a birthday of February 12th, 1943. So I was born with a contradiction right away. They were opposites that made a whole. My mother was an all-encompassing, loving, deeply religious woman who did not go to high school, but I lecture in her honor because she had her 3 daughters become accomplished women, and she was my most ardent and sustaining role model. Father was the opposite. His mother was an English woman who played the violin. They were descendants of the slave trade in Jamaica. He was very aloof, a very self-made person. You don't show emotions. So the roles for parenting were clearly defined. There was no confusion in my house about what my father's roles were and what my mother's roles were. A kind of parental Valhalla where I could manipulate my existence. Because if you know what the roles are, then it gives you a kind of personal freedom. If you're observant, and if you're not the eldest. I was the middle between 2 girls, and we were all very different. Because of my parents and the way life was imperceptibly structured, I could handle it. But I also understood that there were different compartments that you could strategically place to get what you want in life. And your grandfather was my accomplice. When I became a head girl at that school, which was quite prestigious, by the way, well, your grandfather threw a party, invited all of my friends, including the boys from the high school, made a big splash in your grandfather's house. And my father, of course, drove us to the party, but he had no idea about why the party was given and why those strange fellows were all around, because your grandfather provided shield. It also means that I was parented by an extended family. And whenever parenting by my mother and or father became constraining and restricting, Chambers clan, they always inevitably came to my rescue. And at age 76, my greatest pleasure is playing the sonatinas on my piano because my grandfather paid and defied my father. So they had, because they were privileged but poor, my mother never worked, but she developed, like West African women do, what I have now come to understand as an underground industry, where she would use whatever the plantations produced. And she had a network of marketing that no one knew about. So I had the freedom to, when I came to America at age 20, to choose. I didn't feel the constraints. I packed my bags and took a Greyhound bus from Bedford-Stuyvesant to Buffalo and then to London, Ontario. So for the first time in my life, I was completely alone. I had no money. I knew no one there. So career didn't mean the same thing. It had a more unpleasant connotation based with class and race, which I rejected. Because my elder sister, Verna, was doing everything she was supposed to do. And so when the eldest girl, remember now, you just need one girl to, and then they leave you alone because they have very low expectations. So you were allowed to set your own curve.
Yeah.
My youngest sister was contemplative, and I was in the middle, and so I had a very disciplined elder sister. I was 3 years behind her, and I hid behind her coattails a lot. And my sister Doreen is very introspective, and she was a very smart one. I was the mediocre-minded child. I wasn't considered very smart. So I went to Harvard with my husband, who he hates when I say this, but he is a smart one, I think. I think I'm the enduring one. I worked at a place called the Roxbury Multi-Service Center, and I put into effect my psychology English degree. Remember now, I had a lot of psychoanalytic training in Canada. I worked at the Westminster Psychiatric Hospital, and they were very Freudian, and I was also very taken with Freudian theory.
Yeah.
I made contact with Chester Millbrook Pierce, and he became my thesis advisor at Harvard, who understood racism and therapy. He got me interested in space, because space is an extreme environment.
Yeah.
My first grant was the Neurolab mission. We studied the brain in space. You know, my husband's a neuroscientist. And so when I came to Morehouse, I had that grant, and we wrote The Brain in Space for Children. We flew the Neurolab mission. I was head of education for the Neurolab mission in NASA, and I was part of their life sciences committee. Isn't it interesting? That's where I found the missing piece of me, my husband. Over the 50 years, have just considered myself so fortunate to have met him. So some people get tired of their partners. I think I've become more and more appreciative and in love with my husband over the 50 years.
Yeah.
Hang on for the ride, and trust yourself.
Yeah.
And be an encouraging, inquiring mind. I have one daughter. She's Odetta, and she didn't want to do law, and I was very fearful for her. Of course, I wanted her to have security and a good law degree, and the same thing with Raymond. I think I maybe forced my children a little bit too much to go to law school. I'm so lucky to have my grandchildren. When we are old, you and I will get together again to figure out how we broke out of all of that.